This video is sponsored by BetterHelp. I've been wanting to make this video for a while because loss and grief are universal experiences, and yet they are so isolating. For me, books, they're one of the best ways to see ourselves reflected. The very real, raw experiences that we are going through have been gone through by people before us. And today I want to share with you 5 books that reached down deep into my soul and helped give words to all of those feelings I couldn't understand until I read them on the page. To be more specific, these are books that helped me process life and death, loss and grief during one of the most difficult times of my life in the year following my mom's death. I also want to show you a few spreads that I created to reflect on and honor the books that I read during this time. So if you like reading and you like journaling, you are definitely in the right place, and I would just like to welcome you. If you are new, my name is Kelsey Lee, and I would love to have you subscribe. So the first book I want to share with you is Hammond by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a work of historical fiction, and I think it is best summarized actually by the historical note that is included at the very beginning of the book. It reads, "In the 1580s, a couple living on Henley Street, Stratford, had 3 children, Susanna, then Hamnet and Judith, who were twins. The boy Hamnet died in 1596, aged 11. 4 years or so later, the father wrote a play called Hamlet." And the whole point of that introduction is to set up the fact that we, of course, are centering on the family of William Shakespeare, the, of course, famous playwright. His actual name is never mentioned in the novel. It's obviously implied. We all know that that's who the father is, but she purposefully keeps the focus off of him as the famous playwright and not centering the story around him, and instead centering the story around his wife Agnes and their love story, and then of course their children's story, and ultimately the loss that their family goes through in losing their son, Hamnet. The thing that I love most about this book is the writing and the way that the characters are brought to life and their relationships are explained and told. It is so beautiful. Maggie O'Farrell had me envious of her writing skills throughout reading. Now, of course, because this story centers around this family and the loss of their son, it of course is going to be a very emotional read, and Maggie O'Farrell, I thought, just did such a fabulous job capturing some of the experiences of losing somebody, especially those experiences when they're first gone, and the cognitive dissonance that you can experience when somebody who was always there now isn't, and your brain is sort of trying to catch up with reality. And she just did a really good job explaining that. One of my favorite quotes is this one. How can he live without her? He cannot. It is like asking the heart to live without the lungs, like tearing the moon out of the sky and asking the stars to do its work, like expecting the barley to grow without the rain. It was an absolutely fantastic book, and I know that I would have loved it even if I couldn't relate as much to the grief that she's talking about. But because I could relate to those experiences, it only amplified my love of this novel, and I highly recommend it. The next 3 books that I want to share with you are actually all memoirs, and I really came to love memoirs in this year. It's not really a genre that I had a lot of experience with before, but there's something to be said about a book that is just the author telling you their story as they experienced it. I could really relate to each one for different reasons, but definitely Crying in H Mart was the one that was most relatable for me, and that had me crying probably the most because of how it was so relatable. Her experience, Michelle Zauner, with losing her mom to cancer was very similar to my experience of losing my mom. Even though my mom didn't pass away from cancer, she actually had cancer earlier in her life, but she was very immunocompromised when COVID happened, and she ultimately lost her life to the long effects of COVID-19. But the experience of the ups and downs of a long illness, I could relate to very well in what Michelle Zauner shared in her memoir. As tempting as it is when you lose somebody you love to kind of sugarcoat their life and paint them to be a hero who could do no wrong and who you only have loving, fond memories of, Michelle Zauner didn't do that in Crying in H Mart. She really captured the wide range of emotions and experiences that she had in her relationship with her mom. She showed how they had a lot of difficulties and tensions in their relationship, how her mom wasn't perfect, and there were things that they struggled with. I think for me, the thing that I most connected with, even though it was hard to read, was her also not shying away from sharing the very raw emotions that aren't always something we want to admit about ourselves after losing somebody. She talks about walking around the grocery store and doing the mental math in her head, looking at all other mom-daughter combinations, any woman who has made it further in life than her mom did, and doing the mental gymnastics of that person had 20 more years than my mom. That person had 15 more years. That mother and daughter had 10 more years together already than I am ever going to have with my mom. She captures those emotions really well in this book, and just so many others. And again, like Maggie O'Farrell, the writing is just absolutely amazing, especially her descriptions of food. So throughout the memoir, she really talks about food as a piece of her identity, and a piece of her identity that she's trying to restore after losing her mom, because it feels like that piece was kind of taken away with her mom. And the way that she talks about shopping in H Mart, the Korean grocery store, or just enjoying food that her mom would make for her and trying to learn how to make some of these foods herself. The descriptions will have your mouth watering. They were just so well done. I again want to share with you a quote or two that really stood out to me, and I think will help you to understand the beauty of the writing and make you want to read the books all the more. So here again is a very short and simple quote with great impact. This one reads, "I was terrified that I may be the closest thing she had to leaving a piece of herself behind. That is a deep thought and a lot to unpack. And the thing with reading books like this is, in some ways they can start a conversation, but the conversation can't happen only with the book. So while these books did give words to feelings I couldn't express and really helped me to feel less alone, they were no substitute for actually talking to somebody about my own grief and my own personal experiences. And that is why I knew therapy would be an extremely important part of my healing process. This video is kindly sponsored by BetterHelp. In that year after losing my mom, I actually did turn to online therapy with BetterHelp to connect with a therapist and have somebody to talk to and help me through my grieving process, which I will note is far from over. BetterHelp's mission is to really make therapy more affordable and more accessible. And that is an important mission because if you've ever tried to find a therapist, you know that it can be really difficult, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist much easier because it's all online and it's remote. And BetterHelp will help you to find a therapist who matches exactly what you're looking for. I was actually able to tell BetterHelp some key things that I knew I would need in a therapist. I wanted somebody who specialized in grief, and I also really wanted somebody who shared my Christian perspective. So all of those things I knew that I needed in a therapist, and BetterHelp was able to give me options that matched that criteria. And because finding a therapist is a little bit like dating, you might have to try a few therapists before you find the right match for you. And BetterHelp makes it so easy. So whether you are experiencing a difficult season like grief, or you just want somebody to talk to as you generally navigate life, I encourage you to check out online therapy with BetterHelp. If you want to sign up and get matched with a therapist, you can check out the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/Kelsey Lee. By clicking that link, you're not only helping this channel, but also you will receive 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. So visit betterhelp.com/Kelsey Lee to learn more and connect with a therapist. I really hope that it helps you as much as it did for me. And thank you again to BetterHelp for supporting this channel. So the next memoir I want to share with you is called Lost and Found by Kathryn Schultz. And again, in this book, you are going to find absolutely exceptional writing. She weaves together the stories of her own life to explore in a very fascinating way how all of our lives are shaped by loss and discovery. And she has this fantastic opening when talking about loss and the range of losses that we experience. The loss of our keys, right, on a daily basis, perhaps. Losing a wallet, losing something to a fire, and then of course the loss of an actual person, and she explores that most deeply through the loss of her father. But she also expands that concept beyond even the personal to just the human worldly experience of loss, like pandemics and war and just the great suffering that we all experience in big losses, to paint a really interesting and complex narrative of how our lives are shaped by loss. But then she parallels that by talking about how this world is not only about losing, but it's also about finding. And finding, again, in all of the different ways that we might experience it, So it can be as simple as finding those keys and the relief after relocating them, to finding love and finding that person who makes your soul sing, and finding faith and deeper meaning in what this world means. She really does a fantastic job of exploring these great existential questions and ideas through her own specific lens of her stories. And these next two quotes I want to share with you from Lost and Found are two great examples of what I mean. The first reads, "Grief confuses us by spinning us around to face backward, because memories are all we have left. But of course, it isn't the past we mourn when someone dies. It's the future." So that concept alone just resonated so deeply with me, because it was definitely and still is the thing that I struggle most with, especially losing my mom so young, is all of the things that I know we will never have. It's the future and the potential that we thought was there, even though we are not guaranteed another day in this life. I am not guaranteed tomorrow, but there's an assumption that we all go about life with, that we're all going to make it to old age, that our parents will become grandparents. And when you lose a parent young, it feels like that is taken away from you. Even though it was never given to you, it was never guaranteed, it feels like something that you've lost. You've lost the future that you thought you would have. That general concept is something that she explores really well. The other concept that I loved is summarized in this quote. It reads, "One consequence of losing a parent, obvious enough now, although it hadn't occurred to me beforehand, is that it reconfigures the rest of your family." And that quote just hits so hard. And I love how in the middle of that quote, she says, "It seems so obvious now, but it's not something you would ever think about or predict before it happens." Catherine Schultz brings that idea to life here and gives words to it, so that then, right, you can take that exact concept back to therapy, which is definitely something I needed to do, and unpack it in terms of your own experiences. That is the beauty of reading books, is it exposes truth that then you can grapple with and talk through with others. The final memoir I want to share with you is probably the most famous memoir on grief, and it is, of course, by C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed, following the loss of his wife. And what is so beautiful about A Grief Observed is, one, its brevity. It's a very short book. I unfortunately cannot find my copy at the moment, so I don't have it to hold up and share with you. But it's very brief and yet covers so much and is so raw and emotional, because it's really his personal journal entries that he then bound together and shared with the world. But these thoughts and ideas were never originally written for public consumption. It was just a man internally wrestling with the reality of a significant loss, the loss of his wife. And of course, for me personally, one of the things that I most appreciated about reading A Grief Observed is, of all of the other books that I've read on grief, this is one that ties in the bigger and deeper questions of life and death that have to do with faith. It is a man who is wrestling with his faith and trying to understand the loss that he's experiencing and the emotions that he is going through within the context of a bigger plan and God's good design, while not feeling like anything is good. And that is something that I also could really relate to, that internal struggle with faith following the loss of somebody that you care deeply about. And this quote from A Grief Observed is a great example of C.S. Lewis wrestling with God. When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not the locked door. It is more like a silent, certainly not uncompassionate gaze, as though he shook his head not in refusal, but waiving the question. Like, peace, child, you don't understand. I love that quote so very much. It really summarizes that exact feeling of, I know that he has bigger plans, and I feel this great yawning silence in looking out at my faith and saying, where are you, God? How many of us have asked that question? Where are you, God, in these difficult circumstances? And it does feel exactly like C.S. Lewis describes it. It is a shaking of the head that is not uncompassionate. It is simply saying, take my peace, child. You will not understand. That's a really hard thing to hear from your Father in heaven, that you don't understand and you can't understand. But part of faith is trusting that one day all will be made clear. All right, so the final book I want to share with you is actually a play, and it is called Wit by Margaret Edson, and it is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Because it's a play, it's obviously very short. It is only 85 pages long. These 85 pages, though, I don't want to say changed my life, that's a little drastic, but I have not been impacted by a play or book or memoir like I was with this one in a very long time. It truly just took me by complete surprise. This is one of those books that I had on my shelf. I got at a library sale, thought it sounded generally interesting, and then it sat on my shelf for years and years. And the only reason I picked it up was because it was so short and I was trying to hit a book goal in terms of quantity. So I thought I would read this short little play, and then it completely blew me away. Wit is the story of a renowned professor. Her name is Vivian Baring, and she has spent years of her life studying the holy sonnets of the metaphysical poet John Donne. And at the beginning of the play, she is diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So the play centers around her signing up for an experimental treatment, helping academia and science progress by studying her go through this treatment. But in the process, she is wrestling so deeply with the purpose of life. So she's looking back on her life, questioning how she spent her time, what she did wrong, what she did right. And she's now looking forward and looking through the lens of this poetry that she has studied for so long with a completely different mindset now that she herself is essentially looking death in the face. So as she is going through this cancer treatment, she is grappling with mortality, and she also is grappling with the concepts of intellect versus emotion, which she never was really good at expressing. And I love how this play explores the intellectual side of life versus the importance of just kindness and human compassion and connection. In the play, Vivian has this really sweet relationship develop with her nurse, and she starts to realize that in a prior life before being put in these circumstances, she would have looked down on that nurse, and she would have prioritized and took more interest in the doctors because of their scholarly achievements. But whereas the doctors are essentially ignoring her wants and needs and focused much more on their research, the nurse is the one who is seeing her not as a patient and not as an experiment, but as a human being who is going through an incredibly difficult thing, and because of her life choices, is essentially going through them alone. So she is the only person that Vivian really has to lean on during this incredibly difficult experience. And the play just showcases that so beautifully. I love the way that it explores language as well, because she is an English professor who deals with John Donne's sonnets, and one of my favorite quotes that explores the language of John Donne's poetry and how it relates to Vivian's experience is this one. Nothing but a breath, a comma, separates life from life everlasting. With the original punctuation restored, death is no longer something to act out on a stage with exclamation points, life, death, soul, God, past, present, not insuperable barriers, not semicolons, just a comma. It makes so much sense in the context of the rest of the play, and truly, not a single word is wasted in this play. Everything has meaning. Everything brought up at the beginning connects back at the end, and it is just so perfectly constructed. I was truly amazed and astounded by the craftsmanship of this play and the way that the story is told and all of the meaning that you can gain from it. I honestly finished this play and wanted to write a dissertation on it. I wanted to be in a class and be able to talk about it with other people and unpack all of the deep meaning. I truly can't recommend it enough. I absolutely loved it. And the really amazing thing is that you can read it, and because it's a play, they actually also turned it into a really great movie that you can watch, and I highly recommend doing so. So those are the 5 books that really helped me through one of the most difficult periods of my life. They helped me to grapple with loss and grief and with the big existential questions that we all have and want to explore about life and death. I really hope in hearing about these different books that there is one in this mix that you feel called to read, whether it's because you can relate to the experiences that are relayed in the book, or you know somebody who's going through something similar, or like I said, if you just want really incredible writing and great stories, you don't have to relate right now to what you are reading for it to have an impact on you. For those who stayed until the end of this video, I do want to relay 2 other books that I would highly recommend. The first one is one that I actually featured in the thumbnail for this video, so I felt like I needed to mention it to you all here, and that is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. This is a book that I have incredibly marked up because I love how Viktor Frankl, who was a man who experienced the Holocaust directly, he was in a concentration camp, reflects on the meaning of life and is trying to understand his own circumstances that he went through and apply them more broadly to life. I didn't include this in my 5 just because I did not read this book in the last year following the loss of my mom, but it is something that has shaped my worldview in many ways around the topic of suffering, and I would highly recommend it. And then finally, it wouldn't make sense to create a video about books that helped me to process life and death without mentioning the main book that shapes my entire worldview around the meaning of life and the concepts of death, and helps me best to process everything that I experience in this life. And that is, of course, the Holy Bible. Although I fully admit that there were times reading the Bible after losing my mom where I felt like the answers weren't completely satisfying, and you wish sometimes that God could just speak fully directly to you and explain exactly why bad things happen to good people and why some people have to die sooner than others, and all of those big, big questions that we have. I know that the answers are not always fully satisfying, but I believe with all my heart that this book and the message of Jesus and the hope that we have in him provides the best answer that is out there. So that is what I put my hope in. And if you are struggling with these questions, I would be remiss to not say that this ultimately is the book that I would recommend you read. So thank you for watching. I really pray that those of you who are watching this video because you yourself are going through a difficult season, you're experiencing loss and grief, I just hope that you feel that you're not alone in this experience and that one of these books might help you. Again, I do think that these books can only take you so far, and I would highly, highly recommend that you talk to somebody, whether that is a close friend or family member or a professional therapist. I encourage you to check out today's sponsor, BetterHelp. You can click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/Kelsey Lee. If you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to give it a thumbs up, and I really encourage you to engage in the comments. Let me know if you have read any of these books, and if you have your own recommendations for people who are just trying to process life and death and the meaning behind it all, who are going through loss and grief, then I would encourage you to share your own book recommendations in the comments. I'd also love to share more reading related videos here on my channel. I love to read, so just let me know down in the comments what kinds of books you would like me to talk about, and I'd love to do future book recommendation videos. That's going to be it for me this time. Thank you to all of my patrons for making this video possible, and do subscribe if you are new, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Until then, keep exploring your abiding creativity and document a life abiding in faith, hope, and love.